follows Elijah. What's God doing in this period of time? But he's preparing, at least in one sense, Elijah's heart. And it's not the most pleasant experience for Elijah. Ravens are no one's favorite bird, and having a widow care for you, right? Taking what seems like the food out of her and her son's mouth is a little demeaning. Times of preparation. It's interesting how in other people we like times of preparation. We like to see them pay their dues. This past week I noticed an article about a lady named Kim Rode. You know who Kim Rode is? She is actually a famous Olympian. And she again qualified this year for the Olympic Summer Games in Rio. And she is an Olympic gold medalist in skeet shooting. She's the first American to medal in 5 consecutive Olympic Games. Over the past 20 years, she's medaled in every single Olympic game. Every single Olympic game since 1996. She was the youngest female gold medalist in 1996, and in 2012, at the Olympic Summer Games, she again won the gold medal with an Olympic record of 99 out of 100 in her sport. So you wonder, how could she do this? How could she be so accurate, so prolific over this long span? Well, it's not hard to imagine. She practices a lot. She prepares. She puts in her time. She says that she shoots something like 500 to 1,000 rounds a day, every day, year-round in her sport. If you do the math, over her Olympic career, she has shot something like 3 million shotgun rounds, or 600,000 rounds per Olympic medal. That's some kind of preparation. On the track, again, continuing to put in the time to prepare. I don't much like preparations in general. No one enjoys that. I'm sure getting up every morning and heading out to the course where she's going to bust some clays and spend, I don't know how long it would take. How long would it take to shoot 1,000 rounds? All morning at least, or half the morning and half the afternoon. Preparation. The reason we don't like preparation is because it's work. And it can be really painful for us. We want the story of Elijah to talk about how he went out to the brook and he went to the widow and there was all of this preparation and God took care of them every day and they had all they needed and they lived happily ever after. Right? We like that. We think, oh, it was really good. They were right where God wanted them to be. God was taking care of them and they enjoyed that. But that's not how the story goes. This preparation that God was about, at least for Elijah, involved some pretty painful experiences. And I want you to know that God's blessings do not exempt you from suffering. I wish I could tell you differently. I could tell you that God's plan for you is like a piece of cake, right? Just follow Jesus and He'll make everything rosy. You'll have everything you could imagine. Life will be good. Well, I think I can say life will be good. It's not fair to promise you the rose garden. In fact, for Elijah, it seems to be just about the opposite. He says to Ahab just exactly what God tells him to say, and his life is in danger. He has to flee out to the quiet, lonely places. He doesn't get to go home. It doesn't get to check into, the hotel for a while and kind of wait for Ahab to come around. He has to flee his own country. He has to go to a pagan country, to a widow woman to take care of him. Often I think life is like that. We make a commitment to Christ. we say, oh, yeah, that's right, I believe that. And the next week, what happens is, in every shape and way, that commitment is challenged. In fact, I think that the commitments we make, the real, true commitments we make to Christ are always tested. They're always tested, and every step of obedience is opposed. Right? The Christian life is not a downhill glide, it's an uphill climb. God's blessings do not exempt us from suffering. Elijah's story says this. Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and worse and finally stopped breathing. And she said to Elijah, "What have you done against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" Okay, well, this woman obviously thought that God was at work in her circumstances. And she recognized the connection between the blessing of that daily bread that was always there and Elijah's presence. And that connection between from Elijah to Elijah's God in their daily provision created a set of expectations for her. It created this sense that God would, do everything they needed, that he would be their source in every way. She was obedient and experiencing God's provision. And Elijah was right there where he was supposed to be, in the center of God's will. And yet this happened. This boy gets sick. And after a while, I'm sure they grew concerned. And then they began to be just a little desperate as it progressed, and finally he dies. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for this widow. This is her future. This is the son she loved. And she blames Elijah. Never mind the blessings they'd been given. Never mind that God had supplied for all of them. All of, without Elijah, right? The son and the woman would have died maybe years ago. But that doesn't help. The past blessings have no competition with the current tragedies in our hearts and lives. You know that. You could have seen God do amazing miracles in the past, and yet the struggles in today seem overwhelming. Our present blessings dim our sight, close our minds often. She feels judged in this time, right? Did you come to remind me of my sins? Right? Have I done something wrong? Do I deserve this? She sees Elijah almost as dangerous. Right? She says to him, did you come to kill my son? Is that why you've done all of this? So you'd build us up, help us to have hope for the future, and then dash him on the ground. I don't suppose you've said that exact same thing, but have you felt that? You trust in God's supplies, and he's done really good things, and you know him as your Savior. And yet, oh my, the struggles in your own life, the people you care about, the direction you see. You experience, I think, those times of tragedy where all your hope, what you thought, the direction of your life, shattered in a moment. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge for Elijah. How does he respond? What's he going to do in the midst of these really painful circumstances? It's a serious blow. Elijah lived by himself along the brook, just with the ravens to come. You can imagine, lonely. In those times, finally, God sends him to a home with a little boy. Here he is. He's spending every meal, every day. He's living in that home. He loves that little guy. Not only that, he's dependent on them. This kind of her obedience, her responsiveness. He gives her the promise, but she's the active one. She's baking the bread. He's dependent on them. It's a challenge for him. I just think how personal and painful death is. It's always that way. It happens to us. So out of control, people we love. We think that if we are right with God, that things will go well with us. We honor God, He'll protect us. I struggle with that. I remember as a little kid sitting in church all those Sundays, Sunday morning, Sunday night. I sat in church all those Sundays and I watched my mom pull out her checkbook every Sunday and write a check. And I was paying attention to what she was writing, and I knew how much those checks were, and it seemed like a lot of money to me. She's giving that away? And somewhere in my mind, I began to make a connection between my parents' faithful giving and God's blessing on them. As long as they were given that money, we had food on our table, and my dad's job was secure, and all those things were good. It was going good for them because they were given that money. And they never said that. Nobody in our church preached that. But in my mind, those two things were connected. And I had what we could describe as a transactional connection made in my mind, where if we do this, if we honor God in this way, it looks like this. As long as we are faithful and giving, God is going to increase our wealth and keep us secure and all those things. It began to be this transaction in my mind between faithful giving and God's blessing. That's what's going on here. The connection the woman made and the challenge that Elijah is facing is to deal with that kind of connection. What's at the core of their relationship to God? Is it a transaction they're making? Or is it God's heart they're trusting? We never earn God's good stuff. Jesus earned God's good stuff for us. It's not our devotion. It's not our service. It's certainly not our giving. God's blessings and suffering really aren't opposites in our life. It's a challenge for us to understand that times of pain come still, even for people that God is blessing and has blessed. Some of you know it perhaps deeper than others of you. Remember the story of Job? Remember? He's a guy that God identifies as the most righteous man in all the earth. And he lost virtually everything. He suffers the loss of his family, suffers the loss of his wealth, and he suffers the loss of his health. And it's such a serious blow that his wife comes to him. And she begins to talk to him and say, "Are you still honoring God? Are you still worshiping God? Don't you see what He's doing to you?" She says, "Curse God and die," like any regular person would. And he replies to her, "You're talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" In other words, he's saying to his wife that he knows that life comes. That life comes with its share of both blessings and suffering. And he wants to be faithful in both. There is one place in the United States where there is a monument that is built to, well, a bug, right? You know the story, right? It's in Enterprise, Alabama. I don't know if anybody have been there to see this monument. In 19 1915, the Mexican boll weevil invaded southeast Alabama and destroyed like 60% of the cotton crop. The farmers were so devastated by this infestation that by 1917, they had almost completely switched over to growing peanuts. Remember that? And the peanut industry was so profitable and so productive that county harvested more peanuts that year in just 2 short years than any other county in the nation. In gratitude, they erected this monument to the boll weevil. And on the pedestal it says, "In profound appreciation of the boll weevil on what it has done as the herald of prosperity." It's one of those things that we trust to God that He can take and use the circumstances of our lives, even the suffering, to become a blessing for us. Elijah was seeking to learn that. And Peter himself encouraged that. He said, "Dear friends, don't be surprised at the fiery ordeal that's come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you." Because God's blessings don't exempt us from suffering. And sometimes God's blessings through suffering are the way He's taking. The way to blessing may be through suffering. So we look at Elijah's story. Sometimes we think that our limitations, that what we can and can't do, exempt us from ministry. But that wasn't Elijah's perspective. Back to his story. So Elijah said to the woman, right? He said, "Give me your son." And he took him from her arms and carried him to the upper room where he was staying and laid him on his bed. And then he cried out to the Lord, "Lord, my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I'm staying with by causing your son to die?" Then he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried out to the Lord, "Lord, my God, let this boy's life return to him." Okay, don't forget, Elijah's a Jew. To him, dead bodies are poison. They are anathema. They are something to be avoided, especially someone outside of your family. And by taking this young boy in his arms, Elijah's demonstrating that this is his family. Notice he doesn't rebuke the widow, right? He doesn't say, "Hey, get off my case, you know. I've been trying to help as much as I can," right? He doesn't avoid getting involved. In fact, it seems to me that Elijah feels just a little responsible. He's been caring for this family. He has been. He knows that his presence there has been important to them, been the key to their survival. And he feels some kind of responsibility in this setting. He identifies with this woman's loss. He takes the boy in his arms. He carries the young son to his private space. And he cries out to God in that moment. And he asks a couple of painful questions. He prays to God and he says to God, "Lord, my God, have you brought this tragedy even on this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die?" Looking to God and saying, "God, did you do this?" Wow, that's an amazing question. That's a particularly poignant prayer at this moment. He comes and he wonders about God's activity. Did you do it? Saying, what is going on? And he feels responsible, I think. God has used him. They're dependent on him. Is it his fault somehow? Job's pain, right? When we look at Job's pain, we can look back and see the cause of it. That's one of the really critical elements in the story, in the book of Job, is that we can look back and if you started in the middle of the book, you see this miserable guy. If you go back to the beginning of the book and you say, what happened? Where did this cause from? And you see this picture of God in the heavens and Satan coming, and there's this kind of negotiation between them, and God kind of removes his protection and allows Satan to do all of these kind of things. And you come to Elijah's story, and we want to say, well, God, he won't do this, But in some ways, God's at work, whether just allowing these circumstances or. And Elijah recognizes God's almighty hand, and the implications of that are painful for him. He feels responsible. It's a period, I think, of, painful preparation for him. God is working in these. There's a reason this story is still there. It's an important part of Elijah's development as God's servant. Testing does that. Difficult times serve in that way. Sometimes even our sinful choices are those things that God uses to expose selfishness in our hearts, our false kind of foundations within our lives. Those painful times. Training's always painful. Preparation always involves work on our behalf. Even Jesus, right? He suffered in those 40 days in the wilderness. That hunger and thirst was very real for him. Those temptations and testings in the wilderness, painful. Jesus was demonstrating who he was. He's demonstrated a commitment that it didn't need to grow. Okay, it didn't need to grow, but for you and I, those same kind of experiences, painful times, just point out to us, drive our commitment deeper. I think that's what's going on for Elijah. He feels responsible, and what's he going to do in that time? He's so limited. Remember, this child kind of grew progressively sick. So I don't know what it was. He comes down with the sniffles, right? And that morning, my boy, he was up all night with the sniffles and cough, and so Elijah prays for him at the meal. Surely this wasn't the first time Elijah prayed for him, especially as it got more serious. All of a sudden, it's at the life-threatening stage. He's not at breakfast for several days in a row, and the widow's concerned. She goes about her normal routine, but Elijah knows it's on her heart, and Elijah prays for that boy then. Now he's dead. Elijah's reached his limit. The human limit has been reached. But it didn't stop Elijah from continuing to minister. In some amazing way, Elijah's driven to a deeper level of prayer. A dependence on God that goes beyond anything he could have imagined. Doesn't give up. Even in the most extreme circumstances, he prays. Jesus talked about that kind of ministry that flows not from what we can imagine, but from what Christ can do. He said to his followers, "I'm the vine, you are the branches.